The nation was bracing for fireworks even before the cameras switched on. The buzz in the studio audience was electric, the kind of low hum that fills the air before a storm breaks. Jasmine Crockett sat poised in her chair, her eyes sharp, her demeanor calm, yet beneath that composure was a coiled intensity that everyone could feel. She wasn't there to play games, and certainly not to bow to the spectacle surrounding her. Tonight, live on air, she was ready to confront power in its rawest form. Across from her sat Donald Trump, arms folded across his chest, his trademark scowl plastered on his face as though he were already anticipating battle. Beside him, Ivanka Trump leaned forward, her posture deliberate, her lips pulled into the kind of practiced smile that suggested she was ready to deflect or soften whatever was hurled at them. The audience, though respectful, was restless. Some clapped lightly when Trump's name was announced, others booed softly, but everyone knew they were about to witness a showdown. The opening minutes of the program had been cordial enough, the moderator tossing questions like softballs just to set the stage. But Crockett had no intention of sticking to the script. She leaned forward, clasped her hands together, and began with a calm but pointed tone. "You've built your empire," she said, her gaze locked on Trump, not on fairness, not on integrity, but on manipulation and fear. "You call it success. Many Americans call it exploitation." The audience stirred, a few gasps slipping out. Trump chuckled dryly, waving his hand dismissively, as though shooing away an annoying mosquito. "Fake news," he muttered, his voice low but caught clearly by the microphones. Ivanka pressed her palm gently against his arm, urging restraint, but the tightness around her smile betrayed unease. Crockett didn't blink. "And let's not forget," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "the hidden documents. The backroom deals. The communities hollowed out so your projects could flourish. You call it business. I call it betrayal of the very people you claim to champion." The words sliced through the studio like a blade. For a long moment, there was silence, thick, uneasy silence. Then, almost on cue, the camera cut to Samuel Alito, who had been seated quietly as part of the broader panel, listening but not intervening. His lips curved upward into a faint, unmistakable smirk. It was small, subtle, but its meaning was unmistakable: dismissal, maybe even mockery. It was the kind of smirk that said, "This doesn't matter. None of this sticks." But it did matter, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't about to let it slide. She turned sharply toward him, her eyes narrowing as her words snapped like a whip. "Justice Alito, I see you smirking. You sit there, cloaked in the power of the highest court in this nation, and yet that smirk speaks louder than anything I could ever say. It tells every American watching right now that their pain doesn't register, their struggles don't matter, and their faith in this system is little more than a punchline to you." The audience gasped collectively. Even the moderator shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment unfold. Alito straightened, his smirk faltering as Crockett pressed on. "That smirk is the very reason so many Americans have lost trust in the institutions meant to protect them. It's why mothers cry at night wondering if justice will ever truly serve their children, why workers wonder if the scales will ever balance in their favor. And it's why people watching right now feel that the powerful always laugh in the face of accountability." The tension in the room was palpable. Alito's expression hardened, his smirk erased, but the damage was done. Crockett had called him out. Not with bluster but with a scalpel, dissecting the moment for everyone to see. The audience erupted, cheers, claps, and shouts of support rang out, competing with murmurs of disbelief from others who couldn't believe a sitting Supreme Court justice had just been checked so directly, so brutally, on live television. Trump shifted in his chair, visibly rattled. He muttered something under his breath, an insult, perhaps, but his usual bravado seemed thinner, less convincing in the face of Crockett's thunderous momentum. Ivanka's polished mask cracked, her lips tightened, her eyes darting nervously as though calculating the fallout in real time. The carefully choreographed image of control was slipping, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Meanwhile, social media was already exploding. Screens in the control room lit up with trending hashtags, #Crockett vs Alito, #the smirk, and #truth on air. Viewers across the country were tweeting furiously, clipping the moment, and sharing it with captions like, "This is why she's fearless," and, finally, someone speaking truth to power. Crockett, aware of the energy coursing through the room, leaned back slightly but didn't release her grip on the atmosphere. Her eyes swept across the panel, then back to Trump and Ivanka. "This isn't theater," she said, her voice dropping into a steady, resonant tone. "This is real life, real people, real consequences. And if the people in power think they can laugh, smirk, or wave it all away, then they've forgotten who truly holds the power in this nation. The audience roared in approval. Alito sat frozen, Trump scowled deeper, and Ivanka's polished facade cracked into something raw, fear. What was supposed to be a routine sparring match had transformed into something historic, a moment where truth pierced through the stage lights, the cameras, and the political armor of the powerful. Jasmine Crockett had not only refused to be silenced, she had shaken the very ground beneath them. If Part 1 rattled the courtroom and electrified the live audience, Part 2 was where the explosion happened. Jasmine Crockett, sensing the momentum swinging fully in her favor, leaned forward with a calm confidence that contrasted sharply with the chaos brewing across the stage. Her eyes scanned the room, then locked directly on Trump and Ivanka. The air itself felt heavy, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what she would say next. "You want to talk about leadership?" she began, her tone measured, deliberate. "Then let's be honest about what leadership isn't. It isn't hiding behind wealth. It isn't manipulating the legal system. And it sure isn't cutting deals in the shadows while hard-working Americans are left to fend for themselves." Trump's face flushed a deep red. He pounded the table, his voice booming with outrage. "Lies. All lies. You don't know what you're talking about." His attempt at dominance only seemed to fuel Crockett's fire. Unfazed, she adjusted her microphone and continued, her words steady as if she had rehearsed them 1,000 times. "You think you can shout down the truth? Not tonight. Because what I'm about to say doesn't come from rumor, it doesn't come from speculation, it comes from documents. Signed, sealed, and now in the public record." The audience collectively gasped. The moderator's eyes widened as though silently begging her to tread carefully, but it was too late. Crockett had pulled the pin, and the grenade was already rolling across the floor. She held up a stack of papers, copies, clearly, but the sight of them sent a ripple of shock across the stage. "These are financial agreements. Deals with foreign investors that directly benefited your properties. And let me be clear, these deals weren't just about business. They involved political favors, influence traded like poker chips while Americans at home wondered if they could afford their next meal." The camera zoomed in on Trump's face. He was furious, sputtering incoherent denials, but his usual ability to steamroll opponents with volume seemed hollow in this moment. His fists clenched, his words tumbled over each other, and his eyes darted wildly as if searching for a lifeline. Beside him, Ivanka's carefully managed poise began to crack. Her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes wide, and for the first time, the cracks in her polished public image were visible to millions watching at home. She leaned toward her father, whispering furiously, her hand gripping his arm. But the cameras caught enough. The fear, the panic, the recognition that this was a disaster unfolding live. Crockett raised her voice above the noise. "Americans deserve to know what's been done in their name. They deserve to know why certain policies were pushed, why certain projects were fast-tracked, and why some voices were silenced while others with checkbooks were amplified. This isn't politics. This is corruption, and it's as real as the papers in my hands." The audience erupted into chaos, some clapping and cheering, others gasping in disbelief. The moderator's attempts to restore order were drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Cameras panned across the room, capturing faces twisted with shock, fury, and exhilaration. Even Samuel Alito, who had earlier smirked with dismissive amusement, now sat stiff and silent, his face drained of expression. His earlier grin seemed almost surreal in retrospect, replaced by a grim awareness that something historic was unfolding. Trump slammed his hand on the desk again, his voice cracking with rage. "Witch hunt. Absolute witch hunt." But the words, once so effective in rallying supporters, now sounded like echoes bouncing off hollow walls. The more he shouted, the smaller he seemed, while Crockett's voice grew louder, steadier, more commanding. "You've told America to trust you," she said, her voice cutting like a blade. "But trust is earned, not demanded. And tonight, the truth is clear, trust has been broken." Shattered. The audience roared again, this time with a standing ovation from pockets of the crowd. Hashtags began trending at lightning speed. Hashtag Crockett bombshell, hashtag Ivanka exposed, hashtag Trump meltdown, and, resurfacing from earlier, hashtag Alito smirk. Clips of Ivanka's panicked whispering and Trump's red-faced outbursts were already spreading across social media like wildfire. By the time the moderator managed to call for a commercial break, the damage was irreparable. Crockett leaned back in her chair, calm, almost serene, as though she had known all along that this moment would come. Trump sat fuming, visibly rattled, his hand gripping the desk as though trying to anchor himself in place. Ivanka avoided the cameras entirely, her gaze fixed downward, her carefully curated image in tatters. When the cameras cut off, the studio was still buzzing with energy, the audience whispering frantically, some standing and applauding Crockett as though she had just delivered a verdict. Staffers rushed around in controlled chaos, but the electricity of the moment lingered. And beyond that studio, millions of Americans were glued to their screens, watching replays, analyzing every glance, every word, every crack in the once unshakable facade of Trump and his daughter. This wasn't just another live broadcast. It was a reckoning, a bombshell, a moment that history would mark as the night Jasmine Crockett stood firm, spoke truth without flinching, and left some of the most powerful figures in the country reeling in the glare of the lights. She hadn't just shaken the room. She had shaken the nation.